the President and CEO of Ciara Health. I'm also a long-standing proponent of local manufacturing in Africa, and have done extensive work in this area from the PMPA right through to a number of country strategies that seek to promote local pharmaceutical manufacturing on the African continent. Welcome to BioAfrica 2021, track number 1. Our topic today is under manufacturing and industrialization in Africa, and specifically talks to local manufacturing for Africa. We've got a great panel today. We've got Patrick Tipu, we've got Santosh Ramcharan, and we've got Lillian Kidani. I have deliberately not introduced our esteemed panel. They will introduce themselves and tell you which organizations they represent before they go into their presentations or response to the presentations. I thought before we start and before I hand over to Patrick to kick off with the first presentation, it would be important just to reflect on this topic of local manufacturing briefly. This is something that we've been talking about, at least in my 20 plus years in the pharmaceutical industry. This is something that we've been talking about, but for some reason, we never seem to get out of the starting blocks. Certainly, there have been some exceptions, countries like Ethiopia, countries like Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya have made some great strides in this area. But for the balance, I think we are still way short of where we need to be. And this is my reflection. I think COVID-19 has been a wake-up call if we need one. And if I hope to get anything out of this session is seeing what COVID-19 taught us, seeing what happened with the breakdown of global value chains, the price gouging that happened, the restrictions on exports of priority products. What are we going to do as a continent? And so without further ado, I want to hand over to our experts so that we can kick off. We'll leave probably the last 20-25 minutes for engagement with our audience. Please write your questions. Send them through in the chat box. You'll obviously have a chance to also, come online and ask your questions directly. My one comment, when you ask a question, please introduce yourself, go on camera and try and be brief. Also for our speakers, if it's not your turn to speak, if you could go off camera and also mute your mic. And with that, I'll hand over to Patrick to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Sikhumbuzo, and thanks for the privilege and opportunity to present during the session at BioAfrica, at the BioAfrica Convention. I'm going to wear two hats as I deliver this presentation and make some comments about local vaccine manufacturing on the continent of Africa, that of the AVMI, the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative, and then BioVac as well. I'm the executive director of AVMI, but my day job is at BioVac, where I head up science and innovation. So my presentation outline is going to deal with three topics. The Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacture, otherwise known as the PAVM, the complexity of vaccine production, and this is at a very high level, but just to give you a feel for the numerous issues and factors that one has to consider, and then some remarks focusing on BioVac as a high-level case study. So onto the PAVM. I think many of us know that the African CDC, under the leadership of Dr. John Nkengasong, has done marvelous work in bringing key stakeholders together over the last couple of months. And this has been framed as the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacture. And the vision attached to this PAVM is both on vaccine development and vaccine manufacture. And the need to build an ecosystem around that to support it over time. And when we say over time, this is not 1 year, it's not 2 years, it's 10, 20, 30 years. So the PAVM PABM and its stakeholders have set a rather lofty goal. It's a bold goal that shifts the needle from where we are in 2021, where currently we import 99% of our vaccines that we use on the continent and make 1%. And the aim is to arrive in 2040 having achieved a production of 60% of what we use on the continent. And it's an ambitious target, but it's a very critical target for us to pursue. The other thing to appreciate about the PABM and vaccine manufacture is that one can't just generically talk about vaccine manufacture. You need to be quite specific on what you are talking about. Are you talking about COVID vaccines specifically? Are we talking about pandemic vaccines only? Are we talking about vaccines for diseases which particularly affect us on the African continent? Or are we talking about routine vaccines for routine immunization? And what has been agreed on is that when we look at vaccine production on the continent, we need to look at all of the above. So that's just a brief backdrop to the current efforts to push forward on the vaccine manufacturing front and the vaccine development front. I think, and hopefully, I'm right in saying that the debate is over about the need for vaccine production on the continent. For 10 or more years, many of us have been waving this flag and beating this drum, advocating for vaccine production capacity investments on the continent. But COVID has certainly brought that into full focus. And now the question is, how do we do it? And how best can we partner to do that? So in order to appreciate the complexities around, or the challenges around vaccine production and vaccine development capacity on the continent, we need to understand a little bit about the complexity of vaccine manufacture. And there are many issues to consider. So firstly, vaccine manufacture is not a one-step process. It's a multi-step process divided up into different stages. So we have the antigen manufacturing stage, where viruses or bacteria are grown and then they're inactivated. And then we purify the antigen. We've got the formulation and filling stage, where the vaccine, the API, the drug substance, needs to be specifically mixed, formulated into a stable formulation. It then gets filled and maybe freeze-dried. And then we have the packaging and distribution steps, where labels are put on the vials are packed into cartons, they're stored under very, very controlled and specific conditions, and then they are distributed. Now, the vaccine value chain, a different view of it is when we dive a little deeper, you can see the blue blocks match with the blue arrows above, and that's just a repetition of this value chain side by side now. I'm not going to delve into the detail, but simply to say, appreciate the number of steps involved, and each of these steps contain unit process steps as well. So on the upstream side, when we're producing the antigen, in many instances where we have multivalent products containing many different antigens, you need to run the upstream process a number of times and combine that to then formulate your drug substances into drug product and go through the rest of the downstream process. So this further complicates and produces challenges in the vaccine value chain. So the take-home message here is that vaccine production is complex, it's multi-step. Depending on the vaccines that you make, it could take anything between 6 and 24 months to produce a single batch. And obviously that carries risks. There could be between 100 and 500 quality control tests executed and performed throughout the process. And we all know that it's a highly regulated environment because these vaccines are medicines which go into people, and normally healthy people, and by and large children. And then the capital investment required is not insignificant. So all of these things and more create a very challenging environment when one considers the establishment of vaccine production capacity. Just one or two points that I'd like to add with respect to vaccine R&D, research and development or product development with respect to vaccines. So the focus obviously has been with COVID, particularly on vaccine manufacturing, and rightly so. But this slide seeks to point out a very, very important message that if you don't develop vaccines, you are then dependent on outside partners to provide you with material and or technology at any of these black arrows, the points at which these black arrows point to. So either right from the beginning, but then you need the technology and the raw materials, or further along in what we call full finish. And so without the development of one's own products and own product pipeline, you will develop an exclusive dependence on technology transfers. Now, this is not to say that technology transfers are not useful and not important. They are critically important for accelerated capacity building and also for sustainability to get to commercial production sooner rather than later. Another important factor and issue with respect to vaccine R&D is that this technical scientific know-how is built in the R&D phase, the product development phase, where one begins to build a team of people who understand the science behind this. And without the R&D capacity embedded in organizations, that also then makes it so much more challenging to onboard technologies from outside. So there are multiple factors and other dimensions to consider when positioning oneself as a fully fledged vaccine manufacturer or aspiring to be a fully fledged vaccine manufacturer. So one needs to look at the products. The products then tie into the technologies. The technologies will determine the scale. Obviously, that's tied into the market and the projections in terms of the numbers of doses. That in turn influence facilities and equipment, and obviously the skills and the workforce. Now, what is important to appreciate here is that one size does not fit all. You can't expect to build one facility with one equipment train in it and then say, I can make all vaccines. So this is where it becomes very complicated, and you have to make these upfront decisions before investing time, effort, and money in building capacity. So moving on then to the last section of my talk, which is focusing on BioVac. This is just a very high-level snapshot of BioVac. We're situated in Cape Town, South Africa, established in 2003 with the express purpose of building this capacity not only in South Africa, but on the African continent as well. Currently, we have a staff count of 345, and these are highly skilled people who have been trained over the years in the myriad of vaccine production competencies that are required. We've got 2 sterile manufacturing facilities, one for vials and one for pre-fill syringes, quality control laboratories, warehouses for cold chain packaging, as well as product development laboratories. Partnerships have been critically important for us as we've journeyed in this capacity building venture on site here in Cape Town. So our goal is to be a large-scale producer by 2030, and that too is a very ambitious goal. So how did we tackle this? We looked at this journey in phases, and the one thing that I must admit and confess to initially upfront is that this looks all neat and tidy, but it's very messy as you drive along this road forward. It's not as clear cut initially as it appears in the rear view mirror. But at a very high level, there have been very distinct phases of 4 or 5 year phases that we've transitioned through over time. And I won't belabor the points and go into the detail of that capacity building, but just to say there's been a phased growth. And now we are looking at new product pipeline, building new manufacturing facilities, securing new partnerships, and getting to the point of producing 100 million units, vials of product a year. This gives you a sense of how the site was developed. You can see on the left, the 2003 picture is what was inherited from the State Vaccine Institute, and then the development over time signified by the white building. So there's been a concerted effort with respect to building and expanding the infrastructure. So today we sit with Building A. We have the QC labs, we have visual inspection and cold storage, we've got aseptic vial manufacturing capacity, we've got aseptic pre-fill syringe manufacturing capacity, we've got a antigen production unit, which is GMP. We are building GMP compliance in that unit currently, and then we've got product development labs as well. And we are currently building new infrastructure for -70 freezer farms. This gives you a view of how the staff contingent has grown over time, and we're still on a steady growth path. And you might have heard of the Pfizer mRNA vaccine deal that BioVac has concluded. And that will bring 100 plus, 150 plus more people onto site. So this is at the heart of our strategy. We refer to it as the reverse integration strategy. And there have been definite transitions where we first started with 24 people focusing on package and labeling. We then moved with time and partnerships with Sanofi, particularly into filling of vaccines. And then we moved through a partnership with Pfizer into formulation filling of vaccines. So currently we have capacity and expertise for form, full, finish of vaccines. The finish refers to the packaging and labeling. And then from the word go, I'd like to highlight that BioVac has focused on vaccine R&D, and that has evolved over time to have a globally recognized capability on bacterial conjugate vaccines. And currently we are focused on the development of a group B Streptococcus conjugate vaccines. I think it's important to note and also signal that we've developed a technology for Haemophilus influenza B, and that technology we have outward transferred to 3 companies, one in Japan, one in Indonesia, and one in the US. So that also has been a huge shot in the arm for us. This is just a more detailed view of our work on the product development side, focusing on GBS, the Group B Streptococcus vaccine. In the interest of time, I'm not going to spend any more time on here, but I will say that we are at the point now where we have a proof of concept in animals that the technology works. It has been reasonably optimized, and we're busy raising funds for taking it through to the toxicology and the phase 1 first-in-human clinical trials. So there's been a mix of experiences, as you can well imagine. Some things have worked well. The deal with Sanofi and the technology transfer with Pfizer have worked well. And then we had a flu vaccine technology transfer partnership that did not work well and that we had to terminate as well. And there are learnings from that, which I can share later if anyone's interested in that. So there are very, very definite critical success factors that create the fertile soil for vaccine manufacturing capacity to be established. Predictable long-term demand is critically important because if we invest all this time, effort, and money, we need to know that there's a market out there that will buy our product. Policy supportive of localization, absolutely critical, and the South African government has actually made that possible, and that's why we ended up with the technology transfer deals with Pfizer and Sanofi for the routine vaccines. The enabling local ecosystem, also very important in terms of skills development, technical support, regulatory capacity. Money is obviously very important. And then, as I mentioned earlier, partnerships, both product development partnerships, technical partnerships, and funding partnerships have been absolutely crucial to BioVac's progress today. And so, Sikhumbuzo, with that, I'm sorry if I took too much time, but I'll hand over back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat. That was fascinating. I am obviously for disclosure purposes on the board of BioVac, but I never tire of hearing this story because it truly shows what we can do when we put our minds to it and we have the patience to get things done properly. So thank you for that, Pat. I will immediately move on to Santosh. If you could please stop sharing. We'll move on to Santosh and then we'll bring Lillian to comment on the two presentations at the end. Thank you.
Afternoon all. Thank you, Chair. While I'm trying to share my screen, just as an introduction, my name is Santosh Ramcharan. I'm basically a principal scientist and a research group leader at CSR. I'm going to talk about biomanufacturing today, but it's not as sexy as our previous presenter in terms of the slides. My interest is more in terms of industrial biotech and not vaccines. I'd like to basically give you an overview of what we have been doing at CSR over the past couple of years. So just a quick slide on CSR in terms of the recent strategy that has been adopted. We have something like 6 clusters that are focused specifically on industrial advancement, and then another 3 that's basically a supporting role or enabling in terms of these clusters. The bioprocessing or the biomanufacturing falls under the future production chemicals cluster. And in terms of the strategic objective of this cluster, it's to develop local biological and chemical conversion technologies in industrial biotechnology. And the key focus here is using sustainable feedstocks. So I run a group called the Bioprocess Development Group, and the key focus of this group is to develop disruptive bio-based technologies and products for integration into existing industries in South Africa, or for the establishment of new bio-based industries in South Africa, or SMMEs. And I think it's in line with what is currently happening globally in terms of strategies to mitigate climate change. And there's this whole paradigm shift towards, your renewable feedstocks. And with that comes a whole lot of kind of innovation and what is coined now, this whole disruptive bio-based technology and products that have been a key focus throughout the world in terms of fast-tracking this to commercialization. So in terms of the area that we play in my group specifically, it's more around, I would say, anything from applied research right up to toll manufacturing, although we don't call it toll manufacturing. It depends on the scale that we are. And we play in a TRL level around 4 to about 7. And our core expertise is around basically developing bioprocesses, optimizing them, scaling them up, validating them, right through to product formulation and prototyping. And also very important in these type of technologies based on their scale, it's around trying to get techno-economically feasible processes that can be commercialized. Playing in that area has led to us establishing biomanufacturing at CSR for these processes, and also heavily invested in skills development in what we regard as scarce skills in South Africa, both biomanufacturing and bioprocessing in terms of scarce skills development in South Africa. So just a quick one in terms of what we consider, what is biomanufacturing? You know, it's manufacturing components for the biotechnology industry. And this is production using either wild-type microbes or engineered bacterial systems or cell culture to produce important materials. So the goals of CSR biomanufacturing has been, you know, we looked at the area, and unfortunately in South Africa, there is not many so-called biomanufacturing facilities or production companies that have been established. It's still in its infancies. And one of the things that we've decided was that we need to take the lead in terms of developing production technologies that will enable rapid transition from a proof of concept right up to manufacturing scale. And the focus for the biomanufacturing would be that it would sort of support this rapid and emerging bioeconomy that we're trying to develop in South Africa. So overall, you know, developing industrial capabilities to enable a complete biomanufacturing innovation. Sorry about that. So in terms of the strategy that we employed, you know, the first thing that we looked at is that we would like to basically create this or look at new knowledge generation in terms of changing the economics around biomanufacturing. It is quite expensive. Sometimes you cannot compete with products that are produced through the petrochemical route. So looking at aspects that we could improve in terms of scale up, process intensification, continuous manufacturing, those kind of things. It's also a strategy that we looked at is accelerating bioprocess development so that we have basically faster optimization to enable this commercialization of what we are doing. And with that comes one of the key features is either your microbe or your system that you're using in biomanufacturing is to try and do rapid isolation and development of new production strains that would allow hyperproduction. Another area that's becoming quite prominent is around disruptive production platforms. And here we're looking at novel processes and bioconversions to kind of stimulate growth in this area. In terms of infrastructure and support, as mentioned by the previous speaker as well, in any biomanufacturing, it's a highly capitally intensive exercise. So one of the things we looked at is, can we establish some infrastructure that will allow us to do some development and biomanufacturing that will de-risk some of the investments instead of building a plant first. The other thing was basically to reduce manufacturing costs based on, you know, creating more techno-economically feasible processes, and that's what we currently do. Another aspect of our strategy is around human capacity development, and here we see there's basically a huge skills gap in terms of bioprocessing expertise in the country. And here we would basically like to grow or bring in the next generation of scientists in this area. And I would say try to get this distinctive competency around biomanufacturing. I think all that will enable us to kind of better position ourselves for the global market. Very earlier on, we basically identified for industrial biotechnology to be competitive is that industrial, or what we call industrial synthetic biology, is a key driver for production in this area. And we've now started using state-of-the-art technology like CRISPR gene editing to actually design our own microbes to do what we want them to do in terms of increasing yields and allowing them to use those sustainable or industrial feedstocks that are there to do novel bioconversions. And I've just listed a few of them here in terms of platform chemicals that we are targeting. So it's not reinventing the wheel, but it's actually trying to have better, more, I would say, more economical processes or bioprocesses to produce these chemicals, and that's what our target is. So what have we done thus far in terms of biomanufacturing activities in this area? So the first aspect we looked at was in agricultural biologicals, and these are basically replacements, so microbes that can be used to replace insecticides or fungicides in the agricultural sector, or to stimulate basically plant growth and also improve soils. And here it's normally microbes that we would isolate as pure cultures and then try to manufacture them at scale. We've been quite successful in this area over the past couple of years. We basically have bio-based solutions for key diseases like in agriculture, like bananas and Panama disease. And we've also have some that actually increase the crop yields for wheat, and now we're trying that in maize. And these are consortium of microorganisms, but the message here that each microbe has to be individually developed in terms of a bioprocess. So here we have a consortium of about 6 microbes. So that's 6 individual bioprocesses that have to be developed and then pulled together into an active product. In terms of environmental solutions, here as well, bio-based environmental solutions, we've got something like 12 different biological strains, and these are all bacillus-based strains. And what we have done there is develop processes for them, and also launched and now basically manufacture these strains for a local company that combines them in different kind of formulations. And they've got something like a portfolio of 16 different products that are used all across, from wastewater treatment, industrial wastewater treatment, and also basically your other products where if consumers are more kind of prone to kind of using more greener technology, they have an option like a simple thing like a dishwashing solution or a hand solution that is completely bio-based and 100% green tag certified. The interesting thing about this technology that or the bioprocess and the manufacturing is design of what we call a spore-based technology, where you have to design the bioprocess such that your final outcome is that you maximize the amount of spore during biomanufacturing. And it's not easy and we've done that for 12 different strains thus far. It's taken a while, a good couple of years, but now we're at the stage where we manufacture and basically supply these into to companies. The other area that we're delving in is basically probiotics, and this is for human and animal. Here as well, we try to adopt the same line in terms of the spore-based technology for bacillus, and we do produce these things at anything from 200 to 1,000 liter scale. We are now basically venturing out into non-spore-based microbes that we want to bring in. And with that, we are looking at using some other technology at CSR that allows you to do some sort of encapsulation of these strains, these wild-type strains, such that you have slow release and those kind of things, as preventative medicine products that are on the market. The last part is around the recombinants, and yes, we have different kind of, we played in the areas of animal vaccines and high value metabolites. We have a number of expression systems that we've used. These are at TRL level, so we don't fully manufacture just yet in terms of these products, but they're destined to be manufactured in probably a year or two's time. One product that we do manufacture in South Africa on a high value recombinant protein, and this is for a local South African SMME, is a protein that's currently contract manufactured at CSR and is sold into the international market. It's recently been registered with a vendor, Aventor, which is one of the biggest kind of consumable supplier for cell culture media in the US. And the interesting thing about this kind of model is that we manufacture in South Africa, and if the product is basically requires GMP kind of certification, the company pushes this out to another certified facility in Eastern Europe to basically get full and finished and labeled as a GMP product. So the quality aspects of it, we need to basically have in place at CSR so that there's full traceability. So over the years, there's been a number of initiatives, and one of the initiatives in terms of stimulating this area has been the launch of this Biomanufacturing Industry Development Center, which is led by another colleague of mine, Lara Kotzer. And there has been some good kind of examples in terms of what we have done over the past, I would say, 8 years in terms of the number of products and the number of basically jobs that we have created in the sector. So just as a snap view of our biomanufacturing facility, we do anything from basically 1 liter to 1,000 liter scale, like I said, and our fermentation facility is a standard model, which is third tank bioreactors together with all the bells and whistles to allow you to manufacture consistently. So in summary, or lessons that we've learned, we've realized that many entrepreneurs or companies comes to us around biomanufacturing with technologies at a technology readiness level that we see is not correct. And this affects the manufacturing outcome. Simply put, they do think that they are ready to manufacture, but they are not. So what the current model at CSR is actually, it's more of a contract development and manufacturing kind of organization, or if you look at that model, and it's not fully a contract manufacturer, because we have to basically do a lot of work in terms of standardization of the bioprocess in all unit operations before we actually get to approving this, or basically looking at putting in a manufacturing agreement with the company. To us, quality has been a key element, and ever since I've joined CSR, we have improved this. We are currently manufacturing as non-GMP, but we have our own internal quality management system, which we've adopted, and that is mirrored on basically CGMP production. Like I said, we needed to do that in terms of playing in the area of recombinant protein, such that it's fully audited, and you're able to basically certify your product by using a fill and finish facility, either in South Africa or somewhere or outside South Africa. One of the other offerings that we do is, and we do believe it's, like I mentioned, a scarce skills in bioprocessing. So hands-on training, we run a biomanufacturing course. Unfortunately, for the last year or so, we've had to put that on hold due to COVID. But what we do is also bring in, have a continuous internship program where we train interns at our facility in this area, with the hope that they would leave and enter what we think is a growing kind of biomanufacturing kind of industry in South Africa. Other developments that I just had to mention, we are in the process of constructing a GMP facility, and that will be medium to, I would say, small to medium scale. And this is more of a demonstration facility, or a facility that allows to make small clinical batches for either companies or researchers in terms of testing their material. It's not going to be a full-on production facility. We're also looking at improving our skills in terms of actually recombinant proteins. So we're currently in the middle of international tech transfer on insulin, and this is a long-lasting insulin, with the hopes of actually establishing or getting the technology right such that we can have local manufacturing of this, of insulin. The other area is looking at, like I said, disruptive technology in biomanufacturing. And here we're looking at novel scale-down biomanufacturing systems. And with this, we're working together with a company in the UK in terms of a completely different system for how you manufacture biopharmaceuticals, which yields very high and low capital investment. And in terms of new skills, we're also focusing on, for industrial application, gas fermentations. But here it's more around skills development, and we're working with a UK company as well. So in a nutshell, that's what we do in biomanufacturing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Santosh, for a great presentation. Again, we are acutely aware of our time constraints. So Lillian, thank you for your patience. I'm going to hand over to Lillian to just comment on the two presentations and share some of her own thoughts. She has some extensive experience in this place and in this space and working in global public health broadly. So over to you, Lillian. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I think I'll start first by thanking the organizers for the invitation to participate in this very important dialogue, and for those of you that I'm sharing this virtual panel stage, Dr. Ngozwana, as well as Patrick and Dr. Santosh, thank you so much. So just to add, and again, with the limited time we have, to the points that were already shared by my fellow panelists. I think one thing that I'd like to highlight is, and has been mentioned in Patrick's presentation, as we think about expanding access to vaccines and pharmaceuticals more broadly on the continent, is that we often don't think about it from the investor perspective. And when I say that, I mean as global funders, as governments, as development agencies talk about pharmaceuticals and how vaccine manufacturing can be produced on the continent for the continent. The reality is that it costs money. It's a highly specialized space with complex supply chains, as highlighted by my fellow panelists. And that means money. That means long lead times to secure return on investment. And in order to get that critical financing and knowledge and tech transfer into the continent, fundamentally, there has to be a business case, an investment case. And so thinking about how do we leverage all of the things that the continent has in its favor to develop out the most compelling investment case to attract investment on the continent is, I think, something, at least in my experience, has taken up a lot of my time in terms of what I focus on. And where I find that there isn't actually a very clear pathway. So let me just give a couple of examples. We know that on the continent, we are currently consuming about 70 to 80% of our pharmaceutical need is based on foreign imports. So we know that to the point I think highlighted by my panelists, there is high demand, which is important to highlight. But thinking beyond demand, is there both very discreetly a willingness and an ability to pay? How do we define those? Who takes on that burden? And then what is the role that different stakeholders can play to increase willingness and ability to pay so that we can have more investment on the continent and advance the investments that currently exist so that they can grow to be more competitive? What we see currently is that there are, though, as Dr. Ngozwana mentioned, there are some countries that have done very well to advance their positioning. Countries such as the one that I call home, Ethiopia, my neighbors such as Kenya, others such as Senegal, South Africa, of course, have been doing quite a bit in thinking about how can they continue to advance their investment cases. But I will say that sometimes we see that a lot of these decisions by governments to become pharmaceutical manufacturing hubs or pharmaceutical investments are often motivated by social and political intent. Not bad, but by themselves, though they may be necessary, they are at times insufficient to carry a business case that will then attract the kind of investment that will advance the outcomes and the outputs that we're looking for. And so I think one of the biggest challenges we see is for partners such as my panelists that are here and others who are doing the heavy lifting of developing these opportunities on the continent. I think other stakeholders such as development agencies, governments, and other thought leaders really do need to start thinking about how can we help different stakeholders to think about how can they impact investment cases to be able to develop, I think, as Patrick and Santosh had pointed out, long-term predictable demand that can convert into things like offtake agreements that can provide a baseline of business so that at least for the first 5 to 10 years, again, as highlighted in some of the slides prior to this, to my discussion, highlight that the lead time to profitability is significant. And support, therefore, to from commencement of operations to becoming globally competitive will take time, and that time needs to be supported by procurement channels. Highlighting some, such as Gavi, Global Fund, and others can play a role here. But I think we haven't done such a great job yet on the continent for all of us to be able to solidify the building efficiency gains in the currently fragmented value chains that we see. I've been indicated that time is running out, so I think that's where I will stop and pass it back to our chair. And thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this important dialogue. Dr. Ngozwana, back to you.
Thank you so much, Lillian. I think we have about 12 minutes, so I'm going to put a couple of questions to the panelists. Maybe I should start with you, Lillian. You mentioned the investors, and obviously the fact that whatever we do needs to make sense, and we need to think about it from the perspective of the investor. I know that you've been helping develop investment strategies, working with African leaders, and obviously the private sector as well. What has been the biggest challenge in convincing, let's say, people in positions of leadership to really start addressing some of these impediments that investors who are clearly interested in saying, this is a market of 1.2 billion, maybe the ability to pay today is not great, but we want to take a long-term view and assist and invest and whatever. What have been some of maybe one or two biggest challenges or obstacles to getting these leaders across to create that environment that would really start drawing lots of investors to come in and engage on the continent?
Thank you for that question, Doctor. I would say in my most recent conversations, recent being introduced post the introduction of the coronavirus pandemic, two things have come up. One is countries and stakeholders not spending enough time to understand both what their comparative and their competitive advantages are in the space of pharmaceutical production and research. Not every country, but a lot of countries want the opportunity to be able to produce vaccines predominantly driven by their local demand. But when I say comparative and competitive, it's looking at saying, okay, not only do I know what my demand is, but looking at what my neighbors produce, looking at where there are gaps in the value chains of production of pharmaceuticals that I am best positioned as a country, and then of course as an industry within that country to be able to contribute to. And so that requires you to really think broader than just local demand as your driving incentive, and think about what are others doing that I can plug into. I think historically people have seen, and when I say people, stakeholders across the board, not just government leaders, but investors and others, see the pharma production race on the continent as a race of winners and losers. And I think that's a very, that's just a bad perspective. I think investors see a bit more creatively the complexity that you've highlighted, Doctor. They do understand that this is a long haul investment. They're excited about it. They know that the willingness to pay in some areas on the continent are higher than others, but they know that will grow. We are the last frontier. And so what I often find is that investors are challenged to understand this, but that thinking about development agencies and heads of states in this discussion to see that thinking about where is it that I can plug into the discussion and the opportunity for pharma production. So if there are countries that have been identified as potential pharma hubs, how do I then think about how do I plug into that potential hub, and what do I have uniquely to contribute that I could optimize on, is a challenge. Is probably one of the biggest ones that I spend a bit of my time on. And the second one is skills. I think countries don't really understand, and Dr. Santosh, you've highlighted this in your presentation, is that skills take time. Skills in the pharma space are not basic skills. They are specialized. They are more expensive. They take more time to develop. And so if you invest in those skills, even if you understand this, and countries and partners invest in those skills today, it takes about 3 to 5 year lead time before operations in pharmaceuticals in countries start seeing the benefit of those skills, and that they really convert into employability. And so giving businesses that lead time, I think people expect when you talk about skills, they're all the same in other industries as well as pharma. And so in helping to build those capacities and investment in those capacities has been a big focus.
Thank you. Santosh, the next question is for you. There are projections that the continent of Africa will have, in excess of 2 billion people by 2050, most of them obviously, young. We've invariably called this demographic dividend or whatever one wants to call it. here's my question. The reality is those people are going to need to be fed. They'll need clean water. They'll need medicines. They'll need so many things that will be needed to sustain that continent of the future. Will be solved through biotechnology, right? And I often ask myself, and this is my question to you, are we doing enough as a continent to invest? Do the political leaders understand that this is one area of competence that, if properly harvested and harnessed, not only takes you into the knowledge economy, but it can solve so many things in the future? What's your sense of that, and how do you think we need to sort of bring them on board to understand the importance of biotech largely in helping us to be able to address the challenges of the future?
I mean, I am cautiously optimistic that we would basically see some change in South Africa and in Africa as a whole, especially in the biotech area. I do think that we have a lot of challenges, and there's a number to list. But for me, it's one of the key things that we looked at was this so-called there's no alignment in terms of what we are doing from a university perspective, right down to research councils, right down to industry and to government. There seems to be a disjoint. Everybody talks about biotechnology, but yet there are very rare examples of true commercialization of biotechnology applications. And a simple example in my area is that, yes, we said globally everybody's focusing on bio-based solutions. And if you take the area of bioplastics, the reason why there's an uptake more in Europe and those kind of things is because there's strong regulation that has been put in place that are forcing industries to move in this way. And in South Africa, we are not there yet. I mean, if you take a country like Kenya, they have already done that. And that is great on the African continent. But why are we so late? Why are we not enforcing this? If there is regulation in place, that would drive basically innovation. It will drive these companies to basically look into biomanufacturing and those kind of things. In terms of food security, biotech has a huge role to play. And I'm not talking about the very high-end stuff right now in terms of cultivated meat and stuff like that people are talking about in Europe. I'm talking about invest in the simple solutions like single cell proteins or alternate proteins that we can readily use now. Talk about redirection of agricultural waste, or kind of stimulating more kind of growth in the agri sector that will feed into biotech. So I do think we will get there eventually, but I'm just afraid that we might not catch up because things just tend to move slowly. And to me, the major issue is around alignment. If we really want to kind of stimulate biotechnology, then start at grassroots levels in terms of start from our schooling curriculum, start preaching bioentrepreneurship at that level. That will stimulate more growth in this industry. We have a lot of masters and PhDs that are graduating into unemployment in this country in the science area. I mean, bioentrepreneurship should be an alternative for them in terms of basically developing biotechnology solutions that can be of use to South Africa and Africa as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Santosh. Patrick, you mentioned the issue of dependence. And I'm wondering, what is it that you have to do to break this dependence? I mean, if I just think about some of the COVID vaccines that have come to market, you look at the Pfizer, you look at the Moderna, some people from the African continent have played central roles in the development of these vaccines. What do we need to do to break this dependence? Well, no one can really be independent, but what do we do to break this absolute or total dependence? And number two, what do you think we need to be doing, maybe through structures like AVMI, which are already doing it, to leverage more on the expertise and the skills that are available in the diaspora?
Yeah, so I think, Sikhumbuzo, thanks for those questions. I think you make a very important point in articulating the questions, and this is we're not in this game to break the dependency completely. We're not aiming for 100% independent way of managing our vaccine access through local production. I don't think there's one country in the world that has an exclusive sort of total independence when it comes to vaccine production capacity. But I think that experience is informative in a number of different ways. The first is that we see that countries with money where they had invested in local production capacity in a diverse way, privately or through public institutions, were best positioned to respond and ramp up and repurpose their capacities and their infrastructure faster than those who did not. Now, that's an obvious example, but it's the obvious sometimes which escapes us. The second thing is that, so the point I make there is that you need this base, and that base is built on routine production capacity, and that means that we need to solve this market dilemma that we sit with on the African continent, because 40 or more of the countries depend on UNICEF and Gavi for their vaccine supply, free of charge or partially free of charge. The second thing to appreciate with respect to the COVID experience, vaccine experience, is that not only was this infrastructure present in some geographies, but in order to accelerate and increase the chances, accelerate the pace and increase the chances of arriving at a vaccine that might be useful in this urgent situation, lots of risk capital was thrown at this. And I think that my question to myself with respect to how do we build this capacity, I think that we're well on track to building this base, but I'm not too sure, and I'm not a financial person, but I'm not too sure how we're going to get to this point where we can unlock the kinds of capital required to really give this thing a boost. Where we have to invest in product development activities that builds the skills, that builds the pipeline. With respect to AVMI, I think AVMI is well positioned. We started 10 years ago. We're a small organization, but we have identified all the critical aspects of what it takes in terms of building this vaccine ecosystem. And we see ourselves being around for another 10 or 20 years as the partner of choice in Africa that plays a networking and facilitating role together with the vaccine manufacturers, aspiring vaccine manufacturers, and the stakeholders that will enable this venture to succeed. There's lots more to say, Sikhumbuzo, but I see we're out of time.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you to the panelists. I wish we had another, 30, 40 minutes. This is fascinating. Really some great insights and gems here. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Hopefully, we'll get an opportunity in the near future to do this again. I think we didn't have a very large audience, unfortunately, but certainly people can pick this up. The recording will be made available. I think that there's lots to learn. We had 3 top experts, and I'm really happy that we were able to cover as much as we did. And again, my sincere thanks and appreciation to the panelists. And with that, I'll wish you all a good afternoon and hope you enjoy the rest of BioAfrica. Thank you.